Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Roland.
I'm Rish.
And today we want to talk about the rise, fall, and the resurgence of NATO and Western values in general. Rish, your take on this. What has happened over the last, say, 3 to 5 years that make the statement that the West is rising again correct?
Well, I would say that 5 years ago, as an American, I thought NATO was a defunct alliance. It didn't seem to be doing anything. There were only really Article 5 that was holding it together. Attack on one is an attack on all. And in the last year, since Vladimir decided to pop off and start some bullshit, now all of a sudden we're redistributing and redeploying troops. We're about to have our first permanent base in Poland. We've sent contingency forces, and we're getting away from the tripwire system. And I was never a fan of the tripwire system, because the tripwire system basically was 3 countries were going to be conquered, and then we were going to take them back once we amassed in force. And I thought that was unfair to the locals. I thought it needlessly killed people and was just a bad business model. So I'm very excited to see that we're actually putting permanent to semi-permanent units in key strategic locations along what used to be tripwire countries. We need to be, as the backbone, America is the backbone of NATO. End of discussion.
No doubt.
We are
no doubt about that.
bearing the brunt of the military might when it comes to the fighting force.
One thing, one of my friends, sorry to interrupt you here. One thing one of my friends said, I just want to get this in, is, and he was a member in the German army, and he said, well, why do we have the German army? To hold the Russians long enough until real soldiers from the US arrive. Back to you.
And I would love to see that not be the case. I was a huge fan of some of Trump's era policies and how he dealt with NATO. I didn't like necessarily how the message was delivered. I thought it was a bit unpolitical, unprofessional, but I did like the message itself, and that is meet the military GDP requirements. Start standing on your own 2 feet, because America's military is based on our troop numbers, and our equipment is geared around the strategy that we can fight 2 wars simultaneously. We can have a front here and a front way the hell over there and be successful in both. That's the way that we set up our military. But if NATO member countries would meet the GDP requirements for their military spending, we wouldn't have to just shoulder the whole load. Help us help you, please.
I mean, there's a big thing. I just want to say this about the Trump administration. Towards the end, I don't know exactly what prompted me, but I watched a speech in full while I was in China. Then I watched the media coverage of it, and I said, he didn't say that. He didn't say that. He didn't mean that. He meant that. And Donald Trump didn't get any credit for the good things he has done. And I totally agree with you. If the message was delivered in a different way, let me go somewhere else. The government transition between Bill Clinton and George Bush Jr. I have very similar recollections of how that went down in Europe. And my first comment about this America First thing is, well, that is in the president's job description. Literally, it is the job description of every bloody head of government in this bloody world. So why are you getting wound up about it? And
because there's countries that think that we should put them before we put our own needs at the forefront. And
Well,
that
that
needs to
is that
change.
is that is a thing.
We're
I don't
willing
want
to
to use the term
help, but
entitlement.
help yourself.
I don't want to use the term entitlement. I think it is, from my perspective as a European, the last say 20 years. Let's take when the Berlin Wall came down and when the Soviet Union collapsed. Let's take that as a watershed point and say after that, Europeans and especially Germans have been extremely complacent about the whole policy and about this idea that, or if we just understand the Russians and the Chinese, let's put the word out here. This is what we did. Yeah, if we just understand, they will change. We now realize no, they haven't. So really, what I see is with NATO and the whole development in Europe is a lot of people in policy-making positions are waking up to the reality that all this appeasement, and this is what I want to call it, all this appeasement hasn't worked. Hasn't worked in the 30s, hasn't worked in the 90s, in the 2000s, doesn't work now. We are getting our head around it. And NATO is so much more than putting soldiers in a country, regardless of where those soldiers are from, right? It is way more than a military alliance. It is an alliance of like-minded nations to defend us and our values against people who have nothing better to do with their lives and their time to interfere with that. And I use the term interfere very loosely. So for me, what happened from my perspective, and that the Americans are putting boots on the ground now in Poland, is for me a thing.
Well, not only Poland, there's also 3 Baltic states and
yeah.
Romania.
Romania.
We are increasing our troop footprint in Romania.
Essentially, what we are doing now as NATO, now we are actually moving forces that we had in Germany to counter any attack, because this attack would have been in Germany in the 80s, in the 70s, and so on. And what I fear is a generation of politicians that has been brought up with this, that actually went to military service themselves with the prospect of fighting in a war for our very existence. They are now getting their head around to the fact that this is still very much the case. A deterrent is not a deterrent if you are coming with tea and biscuits. A deterrent is 10,000 pissed off US Marines with tanks. Let's call it what it is. And I'm sorry to be this direct with it. We have been, in general,
the US Marine Corps is dissolving their tank
battalions. Yes.
But you still don't want 10,000 pissed off devil dogs looking at you like a crayon as a snack.
I mean, well, the Marines, if I remember my history correct, the Marines haven't fought in the European theater. It was the army, and the Marines were mainly deployed in the Pacific. But anyways,
and then in modern day, they're deployed in small African conflicts, and then mainly in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Fallujah. Fallujah was a rough one for the USMC.
For the, well, I mean, what has changed? The whole political thinking in the West has changed. And once again, one of these early moments where I realized, oh, wait a second, this sounds familiar. Yeah, was, and I keep bringing this up in political discussion, is a former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's speech at the Nixon Library. And people still don't get it through their heads that it is in the US, in the West in general, more and more political doctrine let's call it what it is, to put a wall on our outside border and to tell people to stay the fuck out of our way. That's what it is. So going back to our last week, that we have the experience that this battle is not fought at that wall. Yeah, there was no war going to happen. We realized that in the 70s, there's not going to be a war in Germany. We are trying to fight it out who has the bigger one in other countries, and that's what's hopefully happening with this current conflict, so that this doesn't become a shooting war, whether it is over Ukraine, whether it is over Taiwan, because first of all, you are dealing with, not at the government level, but at the lower, I think you mentioned it before when we were talking about Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. It is not so much that the government would give the order to shoot down her plane. It's about that pilot that is getting ideas, flying in his MiG. It is the artillery commander that is getting ideas about having a whole nation behind them. And the non-action on side of Chinese military forces with that has led to two things. First of all, a huge uproar in the ultra-nationalist community in China, and comments from other Western politicians of, oh, we're going to visit Taiwan too. So what I see, it is becoming again an openly confrontational, but not violent contest between two ideological systems. Let's call it the Western Alliance and the non-Western Alliance, if you wish. And looking plainly at the facts, I mean, that's perhaps another episode why this war is not going to get hot anytime soon. And definitely Ukraine or well, spoiler alert, no, there's not going to be a serious shooting war over Taiwan, over Ukraine, period. Anything that's going to happen in these localities, and I mean especially in these localities, not the world, but in these localities, both sides know this is an open situation. And it is, having seen a lot of armed forces in action myself, having studied military history for 30 years, I keep saying it is not even going to be a contest on the conventional force side. The US Navy is going to steamroll the PLA. So,
but speaking of realistic shooting war, the border between Finland and Russia is 1,300 kilometers.
Yeah.
Finland has one of the most respected navies, most respected air forces of all the Nordic countries. And currently, their civilians are worried. And I say that because I have seen several news broadcasts. I've also watched several videos about how Finland's civilian population is overbooking arms training, and the military is more than happy to train them and basically turn them into reservists. So 1,300 kilometers is a hell of a border. And those people on the Finland side, they saw what happened to Ukraine, and they've been getting the same threats from Russia that Ukraine has gotten. And they saw what happened to Ukraine. Ukraine did not join NATO. Vladimir Putin invaded to keep them from joining NATO, and he turned Finland and Sweden, two of the most neutral nations who had the most to lose from a direct invasion, straight into NATO's hands. And the Finnish people are arming themselves. They're stockpiling pharmaceuticals. They're stockpiling fuel. They're stockpiling weapons and munitions, and they're training the civilian populace.
Well, the Finns are a populace that cannot be fucked around with. Yeah. So
Look
we
where they
said,
live.
well,
Those are hardy people. Look where they live. Look at their everyday lives. Look at the climate change from
one of
summer to
my one
winter.
of I have a friend in Finland as well, and he is like Roland. Fun fact: 12 hours from mobilization, Finland puts more men, trained men and women, in the field than France, Germany, and the Benelux countries together. And let's just call it euphemistically, the Russians have experience to be on the wrong end of Finnish defense. So can they conquer Moscow? No.
But
Can they?
remember, in the last war, Finland lost 10% of its territory to Russia, and they haven't forgot about that.
Well, they haven't forgotten about it, but I mean, it's unrealistic to say the Finns are going to retake their lands.
No, but I don't think they're ready to give up any more land.
No, they won't. You see this kind of thing. There's a meme that was going around 2014. Vladimir Putin at Finnish immigration, arriving in Helsinki, and the border officer is asking whether he is what he is doing. I'm visiting, and the Finnish border guard says occupation, and Putin says no, just visiting. Oh no, it's what has happened. I think interesting that
it's
you mentioned
prime minister or president.
First of all, Putin doesn't have the manpower and he doesn't have the equipment. He's running out of both right now.
And he's running out of morale. The will of the Russian people to engage in conflicts beyond its borders for territorial gains is waning quickly.
Well, they are not even making territorial gains. That's the other thing. Yeah. And I think
but they are dying.
To go back a bit to our original topic, the resurgence of NATO and Western values in general. I think what is happening is that the leadership in Beijing and Moscow said, well, the West is so weak, they are discussing about gender and bullshit. They won't do anything if we just roll into Ukraine, and after Ukraine, we are rolling over Taiwan. Then Ukraine happened, and literally within hours, the world united behind Ukraine. The fact that we should be in Ukraine fighting with them is a different story. But I don't want to say I know for a fact, but I do know for a fact this has completely rattled the leadership in Beijing. Oh shit. If we were wrong about these assumptions that we have about the West, then we are seeing, or we are totally wrong about the assumption of our equipment, our strategy, our tactics, about what you said, the morale of our men and women in uniform. Is this really going to work out for us? And Vladimir Putin is getting a hands-on lesson right now that you don't win that kind of war with that kind of approach against that kind of enemy. So that's not saying Ukraine is winning this war. They are paying a terrible price in not only infrastructure but in people. Yeah, let's not forget that. But now speaking from their perspective, their choice is we are going to lose our home, maybe even lose our lives. I might as well fight back. And that is the same mentality that we will encounter in Taiwan or in Finland for that matter.
And what's crazy is Vladimir Putin grew up during the era of the Afghanistan invasion by the Soviets. You just repeated your childhood. You put people in a corner and everyone else was more than happy because of your politics to arm them to the teeth and say, if you're willing to die blood for soil, We will arm you with the tools you need to fight back and have a chance. He grew up watching this in Russian forces in Afghanistan. If you don't remember history, you're doomed to repeat it. And he just repeated Afghanistan and Ukraine.
The only thing we learn about history is that we don't learn from history. And I mean, it is when I look at my history studies, is I find the situation both with Russia and China so similar to the situation of 1930s Germany and Japan. The
featuring Kaiser
similarities are staggering. I mean, even the Kaiser agrees with me, right?
Yes.
So
he loves our show.
I mean, let's go completely off this thing. We are talking about something that is horrible, that you and I don't want to experience. Not in our lifetime. We don't want to experience it ourselves on our own bodies. Is horrible. Yeah. But
absolutely,
we must not forget, it is not your choice or my choice that this is happening. And again, I keep saying, we can roll over and just get shafted, or we can actually put up a fight. And that is really what the Ukrainians with very limited means are doing, is so remarkable. I do lack the words to commend the courage and the determination of the Ukrainian people to stand against what they have to fight against. And that goes to show, to end my rant here, is that freedom and liberty, yes, those values that Western society is founded upon, are worth fighting for. And that is in the light of these threats of the experience of the last 3, 4, 5 years. The alternative that people are going to choose. That's just how it is.
Couldn't have said it better.
The Kaiser is restless. The Kaiser is restless.
So I guess that's the current state of NATO.
Well, when we say yeah, I mean, NATO has been. I wanted to make this argument about this watershed moments, if the Kaiser lets me. I mean, go back to 1989, 1990.
Go downstairs. Go downstairs.
And
I'm with you.
See a world divided, and one side capitulates. Yeah. So what has happened? We have not pressed home. We have been on the 1 yard line, so to speak, and we did not go for the touchdown. We did not push on to dethrone not only one terrible communist regime, but both or all of them. We were complacent in, yeah, we have won against the Soviets. We let Tiananmen happen. As a retaliation, we sent our whole business to that country. We are now realizing that was a mistake.
You think?
I think the evidence is pretty much out there now that policy, appeasement policy since Nixon, besides what people say about Nixon, he has his good sides, he has his downsides, but the China policy was wrong, period. And I understand using it as a leverage against the Soviet Union may have worked in our favor. Evidence is out there for anyone to analyze that. But has it really made the world a better place? And I mean, okay, from today looking backward, we can say, well, what if that hadn't happened? Would the world be better? And you will have people with all sorts of arguments. But instead of arguing a point that is really moot, we can't go back and change the past. Why don't we deal with the problem at hand? And that is Europeans and Americans getting back together after having this idea about the Cold War is over, life is so everybody understands and wants Western values. No. And I am not a person to say we should export these values. Yeah, we should not force the Russians, the Chinese, or anyone to subscribe to our way of life. But if they don't want to, their choice. And again, repeating as a German, the advantage of the Berlin Wall was the Germans always knew which side they are on. So there's an advantage in this kind of clear-cut bipolar world. And we need to make sure that we get our act together, Americans, Europeans. We need to make sure that we reduce our dependencies outside countries, nations, and areas that do not subscribe to the same value system. Look, it's fine if you have different values, but then I don't want to play with you is also a valid response.
It's okay to live and let live.
Absolutely.
There's no reason to force your values on other people if they're not trying to hurt you, harm you, directly affect you. Live and let live.
Exactly. Totally with you there.
Well, I think this is a good place to leave it. I'm Rish. He's Roland.
I'm Roland. And we will see you next week.